when was it that you started to see social media as a way to maybe just kind of express something what were your early observations that you remember having about what social media was like back 2011 or so? If you can bring me back to kind of where you were and what you were thinking about in terms of, it's the opportunity for social change there.
When I went online for the first time, I was fascinated by the ability to connect with people beyond my own social reach, and that was before the social media era. When social media arrived, it was far more sophisticated, that you could actually engage with thousands, tons of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people without really having them to be in your social reach, and without you having to acquire the traditional status in the society to be able to do that. Like, for example, like you don't have to be a media celebrity, or you don't have to be a well-known politician to be able to reach the masses. And not only that, it was not just the fact that people could reach out to others on in their own, beyond their social reach, but also the ability to engage with them in back and forth, in one-to-many, many-to-many conversations, and also one great aspect is the discoverability of like-minded people is much easier. Like there are, these groups online where, whatever it is, for whatever product that's out there, there will be a group of people who believe in that product and form a mini tribe, which is like goes back to our instinct to want to connect with like-minded people. And that created a lot of interesting dynamics from where I came from. I came from Egypt. There's a government that's been ruling us for over 30 years. It's a corrupt government. There's no democracy. It's staged. And there's emergency law that would get you arrested if you dare to protest. If more than 3 people end up in the street without the blessings of the government protesting, they could get arrested. So the idea of organizing online, the idea of building common knowledge among people who are like-minded, who want to see Egypt in a different place than it is, who are mostly middle class, young, ambitious, naive, wanted to see a better future for our country. And social media, mainly Facebook, provided that. The first time I thought there was something big that's happening was when Mohammed al-Baradei, a Nobel Prize winner, announced that he's coming back to Egypt and he's interested in pursuing the potential of running as for presidency, and that was kind of like a great. It gave us great hope. We thought, and when I say we, is people who so wanted to see Egypt in a different place than it is at the time. And I looked online, there was a group that said Mohammed al-Baradei for presidency, and it has 200,000 people. And I was like, oh my God, that's actually a lot of people, knowing that there were only like 4 million people at the time on Facebook, 4 million Egyptians on Facebook. And I started looking, I remember like clicking at the time, you could actually see the members of the large groups. So I started looking at the people, and I can see some friends or friends of friends, people I've met during my school time, professionals. So it just felt like, oh, okay, I'm not by myself. I'm not the only crazy one here hoping for change in Egypt. What I thought was this new power is going to change the dynamics of politics in Egypt. I was extremely hopeful about it. And I thought the main reason I thought at the time is like it just basically, it empowers everyone. It empowers the masses. It gives them tools of mass communication that never existed before in the hands of the masses. And I thought at the time that this is something that dictators will not be able to deal with.
And also, one thing about dictators, it's another thing in a media atmosphere. I'd imagine in Egypt where, only certain people get a voice, right? I mean, describe what that was like at the time.
Yeah, it's basically everything in any dictatorship, the flow of information is controlled. And what social media offered is a new way where dictators are not yet aware of, that enables anyone to kind of propagate their ideas online. And before the government realizes, the idea spreads and becomes more mainstream. At the time, that was a whole new phenomena that such a dictatorship regime can have not fully absorbed or understood. And that's definitely one of the superpowers of social media, which is the control of the flow of information is no longer under the scrutiny of whomever that is in power that decides what should be seen and what should not be seen.
Bring me through kind of your realization of this as such a powerful tool for liberating a society, and kind of how that led to action for you.
Yeah, I think it's all about rebalancing the powers. I do think that dictatorship is all about creating a way for old power to operate under the hands of very few number of people, whomever they are and how close they are to the ruling regime. And what social media brought at the time was a whole notion of rebalancing power. A lot of us who felt like outsiders, we are influenced by this political system, but we don't have a voice into how this political system operates. And whenever one of us dares to have a voice, they get directly punished. And what social media offered was that it reduced the price of engagement and increased the price of control. I wouldn't even say increase the price. It just, at the time, it was extremely hard for them to control. They don't know what to do. Are they going to block Facebook? Are they going to try and infiltrate it? It's probably not a priority at the time. They're not seeing it. So it just created this fluid environment where more and more people were getting engaged into the political game, and more people wanted change, and more people started getting into groups and feeling more excited about a future that looks different than the present.
You're recognizing this at the time. One, you had a background in computers and you'd worked for Google at that point, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, you're recognizing this at the time, but bring me through it, how it is that you yourself wanted to use it as a tool.
I just realized from the early days of the internet that I was lucky enough to have built numerous websites that had hundreds of thousands of people using them. I have also worked and operated in tech firms since my early days, like even during my college days, and I'm a computer engineer by training, and I have continuously witnessed the new power and what it offers to people. And I was an avid believer in it. And I also, I had a very diverse background. So I lived in Saudi Arabia. I went to Egypt when I was 13. I went to a public school, which is not like a public school in the U.S. It's a completely different. Like actually, I always joke to my Egyptian friends saying some of the best private schools in Egypt are not a bar with public schools in public schools in areas like California. Mm-hmm. So I went to a public school, had a lot of experience dealing with kids from poor neighborhoods who cannot afford what I would think is the basics. I traveled to the U.S. when I was 20. I got married to my wife when I was 21. So I've had like a life where there was a lot going on, and one thing I have learned is to adapt to environments and try and appeal to and trying to question whatever environment I'm in, whatever system I'm in. And I found whatever that was happening in Egypt was very hard I felt very bad for the poor. I felt very bad for my friends. Like one of my friends during college time got arrested from the street and tortured for a few months before being released. And seeing all that going on made me feel like there's something I need to do. I didn't know what is it that I need to do, but I'm not gonna live my life just watching from afar. I gotta engage. And the internet provided a bit of a safe space for me to engage because I engaged anonymously. I was too paranoid to even join any public protest. I was too paranoid to engage with activists because I know the government is monitoring everything, and whenever, as I said, they find someone posing any threat to their power, they punish them severely. It's either by character assassination, putting you in jail. In some cases, you could get also killed. So there was a huge price to engaging directly, and the price seemed much less when it comes to engaging online, especially because you could engage anonymously. And that's how I found my role. I wanted to do something. The way I see it in retrospect is like activism is all about reducing the price of citizen engagement, because you want everyone to have an agency and you want them to exercise their agency, while at the same time increasing the price of oppression. You want the regime to find it harder and harder to oppress people. And if you're doing one of the two, you are doing correct activism. If you're not doing one of the two, then you're just doing something else. And to me, my role was to tell more people who are in the middle class, who are like me, who have not been so exposed to my experiences because I went to public school. I engaged with people from poorer backgrounds, and I kind of know I have not experienced their life, but I kind of know from afar what they're exposed to. My job was to try and tell them what's going on, and to also tell myself and tell them that there's hope and that we've got to work on something.
So what was the catalyst for creating the Facebook page?
The page was named We Are All Khaled Saeed because in a dictatorship or in a system where force is used to manipulate people, the people who exercise that force are never accountable to their actions, because if you start making them accountable from a regime perspective, they could eventually stop acting. So what happens was Khaled Saeed was killed, and I did feel I could be this guy. I could be walking in the street, getting beaten up by police officers and dying, and nothing happens to the police officers. And if you really want to stop this, you have to increase the price of oppression. You have to tell them that it's enough and that we want justice. We want our freedom. We want our dignity. And I really think that a lot of what we did had to do a lot with dignity. When you're stripped out of your right to speak up, when you're stripped out of your right to be part of the system, to have a voice in the system that governs you and impacts you directly in your day-to-day life, you're stripped out of your dignity. So it was a call for dignity that I wanted to voice as an individual that happens to be resonating with hundreds of thousands of others who thought that this voice is a good representation of what they also feel.
Were you there in the street that day, or this was something that was...
No, that was online.
Online, okay. Help bring me into kind of the nitty-gritty of that story, of your deciding to create the page. Like, where were you and what was... Bring me into your kind of how that, was it just in the course of one night that you decided to do that, or...
In June 10th, 2011, I was in my study room in Dubai. I was at the time working for Google in the Middle East office. I spent a lot of time in Egypt, so I was still very connected to what's happening in Egypt, and I was hoping for Egypt to see a change in 2011. which was the presidential elections. I saw on my feed a photo of a disguised face, like someone that seemed to have been tortured, and it just mentioned his name and a photo of him when, just like a portrait photo of him when he was alive, and I just could not believe the cruelty in the photo. When I see something that doesn't look right, I just question it. And I was like, oh, there must be something missing here. And then I was reading, and it's 2 police officers that were running after him to want to catch him. And he ended up being beaten up, and he died. And his brother leaked the photo because normally when such a thing happens, the government does its best to hide everything. But he managed to snatch a photo of his brother's body and sent it to political activists. And when I saw the photo, I was devastated. I started, I remember like I was crying in my study room because I just felt like this got to stop. Like, you can't just keep going in that way and think that Egypt is gonna progress as a country. And I do feel responsible to put time and effort towards this. And I just decided to create that Facebook page. Not that I was thinking that this Facebook page was going to be effective. I just did it out of like, okay, that's what I could do. I could be anonymous. I could create a page, and I will try in this page to focus on one thing. I was not like trying to create a movement or anything. I just wanted to call for bringing the officers who did this to justice. Because what I thought at the time was, if you increase the price of oppression, it's likely you could save lives. When I created the page, the name was We Are Khaled Saeed. So the idea behind the name was that I did feel like I could be him, because as I mentioned, I've witnessed the state security in Egypt kidnapping and arresting people for months, torturing them. And I knew that there's just the fact that I'm getting engaged in activism, I could actually be also arrested, killed, or kidnapped, or all these things could happen to me. And my job is to actually resist. I don't want to just watch from afar. I want to engage. And the page was a great way to engage. A few 100,000 people joined the page. And the first 3 days, actually, 100,000 people liked that page. And it was, I felt that I had complex feelings at the time. One is like, oh my God, this is actually getting serious. And I have told a few activists about the page early because I did not think it was going to be effective or it's not going to be that big of a deal. But when it went to 100,000, I started freaking out about, did I just put myself at risk? Because if it spreads that I'm the admin of this page, I could actually get hurt if I end up like organizing any events and stuff. And through this page, I tried to, with another co-admin, which I happen to know from Facebook, and we've never met online at the time. His name was Abdurrahman Mansour. I told him, do you want to help out? I liked his ideas and his writings, and I was like, do you want to help out with me managing this page, since it's going to look like it's going to be a full-time job to create flow of information, create common knowledge, come up with creative ideas on how could we facilitate dialogue with the government, because I don't believe in just opposition for the sake of opposition. My goal is to reduce oppression and if that happens by collaborating with people from within the system, let that be. Of course, throughout the next few months, the page was growing until what happened in Tunisia. Ben Ali, as you probably remember, what was called the Arab Spring started with massive protests in Tunisia following a man who set themselves on fire because of the economical conditions, and that led to Ben Ali fleeing off Tunisia. And this is the first time I've seen an Arab dictator try and apologize, and then when people say no, they had to escape. And it just created for me a moment of maybe we can do this. Maybe we could actually revolt against our own government and get them out of our way, because for democracy to happen in Egypt, those people are never gonna bring it. Those people do not believe in democracy. They have been running the country for 30 years, and they don't want others to share power with them. So it was inevitable, and I just posted an event calling for a revolution in 10 days. Like, we should all get to the street and we should all bring down Mubarak. And that was actually, I was just a sound of a lot of what the people were saying, because a lot of people were saying that, oh, what I did was just basically put in the invitation on a page that has hundreds of thousands of followers. And that ended up, the event on Facebook was reached 1 million people, and it was confirmed by 100,000. And we took to the streets. And it's just basically one of those, it showed to me like the great power of social media. I remember a lot of interviewers early when I did anonymous interviews, they would tell me, oh yeah, social media is overrated. It's slacktivism. People are just like, venting their anger, but nothing is going to happen. Nothing concrete is going to happen on the ground. And I did not believe in that. I believe that those people are not zombies. They are real people, and granted the right time and the right environment, the right group, the right call, they will act. And that's what happened on 25th of January. Tens of thousands of people, men and women, a lot of them are young, broke the barrier of fear. My best memory on the day was a young man who stopped a police tank by just standing up in front of it. And he might as well just died at the time if the police tank decided to, but the police tank had to stop. And for me, that was an announcement of a new era, a new relationship between the government and the people. And that was kind of like the moment where I felt like that online energy could actually be converted into an on-the-street action.
And what was it that prompted you to actually make an event, on the page? I mean, why was it? Was it because of what was happening in Tunisia? But what prompted?
Yeah, it was mainly the belief that there is no hope. There's no hope in believing that people who got us to where we are at the time are the ones who are going to get us out of that. I did not believe in the insider's ability to turn things around. I got a lot of emotional hope, and I say emotional because it was very emotional when I saw what happens with Ben Ali. And there were videos. The flow of information was actually amazing at the time. And if that would have happened 20, 30 years ago, most of the the government, the mainstream media is gonna portray a certain image of how Tunisia is bad and whatever that happened there is bad, and how Egypt is stable. Actually, the mainstream media tried to do that, but it didn't work because they are not in control of all the media anymore. There is social media that is uncontrolled by them. They're controlled by algorithms developed in Silicon Valley that they have no way to infiltrate at the time.
Before the event, I mean, what was it like for you to have kind of seen the ranks of people on the page grow to hundreds of thousands? I mean, was just completely by surprise to you, or, I mean, what was your thinking at the time?
It is. I wouldn't call it a surprise, but it was both a responsibility and an opportunity. I like to believe that I'm responsible as much as I can. Like, for example, I told my co-admin Abdurrahman, like, we don't want to call for any protests. Most of these people who join the page are apolitical, and we don't want to expose them to risks because the government would arrest them. We don't want to get them to do things that they don't understand the consequences of them. Little do I know about that few months later, I'm going to put in an invitation for a revolution. But it was more, I took that as a responsibility. I tried to be as responsible as I can, as honest as I can. It was anonymous, so there was an alter ego, which I now say it's like the best version of me. I'm not as good as that alter ego, but I would strive to be that alter ego. And it was more of a responsibility that at some point it was too much as well. I did not enjoy the fact that you are responsible. Sometimes we have done activities, and every time there's a group activity, I'm very concerned about the safety of everyone. And those are people I don't know, I don't have access to if something bad happens to them, and I don't even know how to help them if something bad happens to them. So I wanted to be as responsible as I can. And that's why, like, I was not like super happy and excited by the fact, like, I'm angry. Those are not numbers. Like, that's one thing that I keep coming back to. And I also think about that, and I tell that to my fellow engineers and product managers. You know, these metrics in your dashboards, they are real humans. They are people who could be at risk, who could also benefit tremendously from your technology. They could prosper, they could be killed. All these things could happen to them. So these are not like when we say, oh, growth 10%. What does this 10% mean? So I was looking at the metrics, definitely, because I want to make sure that there's more, the movement is growing, or the idea is propagating, instead of saying the movement, because it was not a movement in its traditional meaning of a movement. The idea is propagating, but I was also very trying to be as responsible as I can.
And there was no playbook at that point in time, right? I mean, in terms of creating a social movement or propagating ideas, right? I mean, this was relatively new.
Yeah, I also don't believe in playbooks. I think every like, you could learn from other people's experiences and past. You can relate to other people's past experiences, but there is no such a thing as playbook. Every society has its own culture, has its own norms. Every group of people have their own ambitions. So I don't believe that much in playbooks. What was fascinating about social media, though, is like you can get instant feedback. You could get to understand how and tweak your message accordingly. It's a double-edged sword, though, because as you know, like, the short-term emotions are not necessarily always right. You could, and that's actually pretty dangerous, because you could optimize for getting short-term rewards in the expense of long-term value. And we'll talk about that. That's actually one of the big problems that within social media companies that happens. Also, that's a problem within social movements right now. That's a problem with politicians, because somehow we're optimizing for what's short-term versus what's long-term. And most of what's optimized for in short-term is very emotional and less rational.
I mean, we'll definitely get to that, because that's an important realization, I guess, that you come to a little bit later, right? I mean, with the demonstrations, right? I mean, it's, everything breaks loose at that point in time.
Yeah, people broke the fear. The authoritarian regime wanted people scared, because if they stop being scared and they speak up, that becomes very dangerous for the survival of the regime or for the power they're holding. Basically, the protest was breaking the barrier of fear. I was snatched out of the street after 2 days of the protest, and I was blindfolded and handcuffed for 11 days. I don't know where I went to. I was interrogated by what I assume to be state security officers or intelligence officers. I have no idea. During the time the protest went into a roller coaster, one day is like hundreds of thousands of people show up, and then an emotional speech by the former President Mubarak. Then pressure from families asking the youngsters to go back home and everything will be all right, and he's not gonna run again for presidency, and his son is not gonna run again. His son is not gonna take over as people were anticipating. And I was released after 11 days. I came out to see a completely different Egypt than the one I left. I was taken away. I saw a complete different Egypt than the one before I was arrested. In the square, it was more of like Muslims, Christians, liberals, leftists. Everybody's collaborating. There was a lot of euphoria in the square when I was released from prison. My experience before 25th of January is like it's hard to get hundreds of people in the street to resist the regime. And I went to the square, and there was barely a place for someone to move. Like, people were in hundreds of thousands. They were full of energy. They wanted change. Everyone wanted change for a different reason, but they all wanted change, and they were all hopeful. And I saw an Egypt that I want to live in. Everybody is like getting together, men and women, Christians and Muslims, and non-religious people, leftists, liberals, and there was kind of a euphoria within and energy within the square that just made me naively believe that that's an Egypt that we could actually achieve as soon as Mubarak is out. A few days later, Mubarak was forced out of power because the protests started getting into even his own area in Heliopolis, and the army kind of like decided to ask him to leave power. And it was an unprecedented moment. It created a lot of hope, created also unrealistic sense of worthiness for people like me who were involved in the protests. But sadly enough, we were humbled by the consequences, the failures that we've experienced. And I say sadly, it's good to be humbled, so that's not the sad part. The sad part is that things turned out to be went into a much worse direction than what we have anticipated. And the hardest part for me was seeing the tool that brought us together tearing us apart. And before 2011, I always thought of the internet as a liberating tool. How can a dictator control this? It's uncontrollable. And after this, I removed the word liberating, and it's just a tool. It will be easily used by anyone because it's just a tool. And the fact is, the economics of using it for the bad is much more rewarding than the economics of using it for the good. Take fake news, for example. It is much cheaper to create fake news, and it's much more engaging to create fake news. And therefore, fake news could easily spread across the internet, while to verify news, it's much more expensive. Like, economically, you have to hire professional journalists who are going to spend time verifying the information. And then at the end of the day, also, it's less engaging, so it gets much less distribution. So realizing now as I'm saying it, it's like I was extremely naive in a way I don't like actually now. I don't like admitting that oh wow, how naive I was as thinking that these are liberating tools. And I think part of the naivety was falling for drinking our own Kool-Aid as engineers and as people who work in building these technologies, where we everybody likes to think that they're like, you probably want to think that your job is the most productive, the most useful for the world. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to wake up in the morning excited about your job. And that's what we did. But the only not the only, one of the critical problems that have happened as we build these products is that we did not take the serious consequences, both intended and unintended, as serious as they should be taken. So these tools were built for connecting people, and people did connect, but anybody could manipulate others using these tools. Anybody could hack into this system, into this game, and get the attention that they want and direct people's attention towards that. And it's kind of like it becomes tools of mass propaganda, and it becomes much harder to deal with because they're much less obvious. Like in the past, government X created a mainstream media channel, it's financing it to create propaganda in country Y. And you already know these are facts. But now it's kind of like all these anonymous players, just like how I was anonymous. I use my anonymity for good. But there are others, or what I perceive as good. I'm not making a plain judgment call on behalf of others. What I perceive as good, but there are others who are going to use it in what I would perceive as bad and dangerous. And that raises all these questions about the technologies that we have built and how we rushed into using them and building them without thinking much about the consequences.
There was a moment that you were being interviewed on CNN at the time, and you said that you really one day wanted to go meet and thank Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
So tell me about that. Tell me about that moment and what you were thinking in that interview.
It was just, everything that was happening was surreal. Like in just 25 days, I started a call for a revolution. I traveled from Dubai to Egypt to witness one of my very first and biggest protests in my life. I got snatched out of street, got kidnapped and tortured and released in 11 days. I went outside to become all of a sudden recognized face and got a lot of media attention. And then a couple days later, a years old dictator was forced out of power. And it was surreal to the extent that I started like building all these romanticized views of the world, of politics, of everything. And then I was also very appreciative of the technology, because the technology was, for me, the enabler. I would not have been able to engage with others. I would not have been able to create the page I would not have been able to propagate my ideas to others without social media, without Facebook. And that's why, for me, I was very grateful for whatever Mark and his team built. And this is why I wanted to meet him. I actually met him as well. So at the time, I did see him when I visited the US, and it was a nice meeting. In it, I did feel that Mark somehow had mixed feelings about this. Like, what he built was not to be used in politics. And I think his heart was in the right place, right? Because he thought this is more of a social product where people engage. He didn't see it as a place where people spark revolutions. He did not create a strong viewpoint on where should Facebook go. Actually, I remember it was funny at the time, because I asked to take a photo with him, and I don't put online photos with people I meet. I find that I don't do that. Let me not judge others who do it. I just don't do that. But I think Mark was not comfortable with the idea. And he said, oh, we'll take the photo and mail it to you. And I said, sure. And I knew he will never mail it to me, and he never did.
And why do you think he was uncomfortable with that?
I just think he did not want his product to be perceived as an active political player. And that's something I actually told him and others in the meeting. It was just like, I'm very grateful for this product, but I'm happy that you are not an active player in the game, because you should not be. You're just providing a technology tool, and you should not be part of that game. Like, actually, at the time, a lot of people were criticizing Facebook because they shut down our page because I was using a fake account to operate the page with. And I also had mixed feelings about that. Like, on one hand, yes, I did not want my identity to be known by Facebook, that I'm the one running the page. On the other hand, I understand what they're doing. They want to be protective of, because someone could just create an anonymous page and harm others, impact the life of others in a very negative way.
And so when you look back at your own naivete, like, what were the sorts of things that started to break that for you, that you started to see happen specifically where social media took on a less optimistic light for you?
It was mainly how the algorithm works. It was mainly how, and I talk.
So bring me through. So kind of like what were you recognizing about the algorithm, and what, you know?
So the best thing in Facebook was actually the newsfeed at the time, when I was managing the page, because the fact that most of the people are actually not going to proactively go to the page every day to know what is the page up to. It just reduces the audience significantly. The most amazing part of Facebook was the fact that everybody goes to a newsfeed that is personalized to them, and they could see content. And if they happen to engage with the page, they're going to see more of the page. And that does give us enormous power. Those algorithms that operate these news feeds make billions of editorial decisions a day, because there's probably tons of millions, hundreds of millions of pieces of content that are created every day, and the algorithm makes the call on who should see what. So you could be clever into trying to make your message more engaging, so that when you post on Facebook, people like and share and comment, so more people end up seeing it, because the algorithm is going to say, oh, okay, that's engaging content, people like it, show it to more people. Sounds good, until someone decides, okay, then how could I optimize for increasing my audience? And unfortunately, one of the things I learned later was, which I think was a very precious learning, was when I read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he talks about humans have two systems. One that's like the very emotional, irrational, that's very spontaneous, takes actions pretty quickly, doesn't. And there's another system too that's more analytical, takes time. And most of the time we hire system one, because system one is less brain taxing. You just, if we hear sudden noise right now, we're all just gonna look at where the noise is, and we're not gonna process much before that, because it's more tuned to our survival. System two is like, for example, sophisticated, complicated mathematical problems or situations that has like long-term implications on us. We tend to use system two. What social media does is it basically puts system one on steroids. It just get you very emotional, it basically hacks into your human emotional self. I'm not saying that, by the way, as if there was a master plan, and that's like one thing I don't like in the current movement of like trying to criticize Facebook, which is like it seems that there's a master plan to hack into people's brains and control it's much more simpler than that. Those are basically product managers and engineers who really wanted to do good and build good products that get used by billions of people. I mean, at the time, probably they're not even thinking about millions, but they now probably think in billions of people, and they just want to feel good about what they are building. They're not really into hacking anyone or manipulating them or getting them addicted. These are all, in my view, unintended consequences. And it's very hard to be in their position. It's extremely hard to be in their position. I actually empathize a lot with people at Facebook, and I think they're into a very hard problem because they're operating a very complicated economical system that no matter how they try and move and change things, there will be always unintended consequences. And the most harm part of the society that loses in whatever change they do is going to be the one that's mostly speaking up. So back to the question, I think the big part of naivety here is inability to understand that these tools are just enablers for whomever. They don't separate between what's good and bad. They just look at engagement metrics. If there was once, I can't remember who said this. It was saying like journalism, like good journalism, cover stories that are true and hopefully engaging. Social media cover stories that are engaging and hopefully true. And I think that's a fundamental difference.
But when did you start to question the engagement optimization system, right? So you had this page, you obviously engaged a lot of people, you helped to, it helped to spark something at a particular moment in time. But when did your thinking start to change? What was it that you were observing at the time? It's
the spread of misinformation, fake news in Egypt in 2011. I was under a lot of smear campaigns. My favorite one was when I was called a Freemason. I did not even know what the word means at the time. I had to Google it. But it's basically conspiracy theories are very viral in our part of the world, and engagement-driven algorithm does not care about if Wael is a Freemason or not, or is the sources reliable or not. If more people are liking and commenting and sharing the fact that Wael is a Freemason, we'll let the algorithm tell everybody, hey, announce it. And of course, it's when it hits personal, you're more emotional about it. And it was just not about my own example. I was just seeing this environment that if you increase the tone of your posts and become more exclusionary against your opponents, you're going to get more distribution, because we tend to be more tribal. So if I call my opponents names, my tribe is happy and celebrating. Yes, do it. Like, comment, share, let everybody hear about it. And if I'm trying to be objective, if I'm trying to actually humanize my opponents, barely I'll get distribution. In most of the cases, I will not get distribution. I'll not get rewarded by the system. So I started thinking, I do think that social media is an economic system. It has all aspects of economic systems. People are trying to aggregate wealth. Wealth in this case is power demonstrated by others following you and listening to what you have to say, and your ability to propagate your ideas. And the more you have an audience, the more likely you're going to be celebrated. And in this economic system, the norms are designed by a very simple rule. Rewards are superpowers. If you reward a certain behavior, you'll see more of it. So if you tell me, if I'm more polarizing, if I'm more sensational, if I attack my opponents, if I insult them, I'm going to get more distributions. A lot of the people are just gonna do that. And the bad content is gonna outrank the good content. And it becomes very challenging for people to create good content because you know that there's no audience. And then here comes the argument, because I've had a lot of arguments with engineers who work in ranking systems, and I've personally worked very close to engineers who work on ranking systems about, well, isn't this what people want? No, it's not what people want. It could be what System 1 within people want, because it's emotional, it's tribal. But generally speaking, if you take two people and tell them the consequences of this extreme polarization is going to be toxic in the society, it's going to actually get us into a point where we're all going to lose. Do you want this extreme polarization? Most likely they'll say, no, we don't. So the idea here is that these economic systems were built with, in my view, a lot of naivete, because they were meant for cat videos, baby photos. I'm getting married. Here's the food I'm eating. And yeah, I mean, the most engaging, most of distribution does make sense in this, because there is no consequence. There's not much consequences on the society based on these decisions. But once this gets into issues such as race, gender, social unrest, it becomes very dangerous, because what you are doing is you are increasing the gap, you're widening the polarization, you're rewarding sensationalists and big voices. And that's why, in my view, the rise of Donald Trump, with his certain behavior on social media, is some sort of a hack into the system, because someone just know how to create content that gets everybody consume, and he just used that with brilliance.
But how early was it for you that you started to kind of recognize what the system really was? That there was something, that there were perverse incentives inside of this
It's
system?
2011. It's the few months following the revolution, because the political environment was already toxic on the ground, and that's something also I try to talk about. Facebook does impact our behavior, but it also a mirror of our behavior, right? Like on the ground. Like, it can't be that if the society is in peace, Facebook is going to come in and disrupt it, because if the society is in peace, most likely they're going to use the tool to amplify the peace. What was happening in Egypt was polarization. A lot of the powers that were together in the square, not wanting Mubarak, did not know what they want, or they discovered eventually that what they want is contradicting. So an Islamist want in Egypt that is different than what a liberal wants, and all these voices started to clash. And the environment on social media breeded that kind of clash, like that polarization, rewarded it, and made it actually less and less appealing to try and build consensus. And I was seeing that in a lot of grief and disappointment. I actually started pointing out to that early on, from 2012, because I thought like these tools could become actually very destructive in the hands of wrong people, or not wrong people, by rewarding the bad behavior. Because I don't think there are good, right people and wrong people. Just like if you reward the bad behavior, you are going to get more of it. And if this bad behavior is toxic for the society, that's pretty dangerous. It's going to take us into points where there are huge consequences that could have been avoided.
It also just seems what you're describing is that it's not neutral. You're recognizing at that point that it's not necessarily an algorithm makes decisions that are not
it's editorial. It's
right. So I think what I'm trying to understand is that, are you recognizing also that there's the middle ground, or the middle, politically or socially or whatever, it doesn't have a competitive advantage in this? To help me understand kind of what you're observing there.
One of the challenges of engagement-driven algorithms, and it has to do with human nature, is that rational voices that tries to bridge the gaps and bring people together lose the podium. They don't get the distribution. They don't get the engagement, because what they're posting is mostly not tribal, is mostly not polarizing, is mostly not sensational. And that's not what most of the people who engage, not most of the people in general, but most of the people who engage with content want. You are likely to engage with content that confirms your beliefs. And the more it confirms your beliefs, the more likely you are going to engage with it. And if you are part of a minority, or even part of a majority that wants to feel good about yourself being in that group, You want to hear the most polarizing views about the other group, because you want to justify to yourself why you are in position X and not in position Y. And I think that's one of the challenges. Taming down sensationalism is pretty critical. People talk about fake news. People talk about impact on political campaigns. I think these are important issues. I'm not underestimating them by any mean, but I think there are far more foundational structural problems that need to be addressed, which has to do with these platforms reward polarization, these platforms reward sensationalism, and that got to stop, or in other terms, that got to be tamed down. You have to create a view that's nonpartisan. I'm not saying like do this to the right or the left. You just have to figure out how to detect sensational content and how to ensure that people who create that content are aware with the fact that the more they are sensational, the less likely they're going to be heard within these platforms. And that will eventually change their behavior and get them to be less sensational. And if you tame down these discussions from being my ego versus your ego into like the issue that we are having a conflict around, that could be good. You can't bring it down to, we're not robots. We're still gonna have emotions involved in every situation we're in. But I don't see this as a binary decision whether we're sensational or not. But we can be less sensational. We could be less sensational by not rewarding sensationalism, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges I think facing Facebook, because it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to detect sensational content at scale in different languages. It's not easy to do it because also once they start doing that, many of these very opinionated people are going to say Facebook is censoring our content, and they're going to go out and complain about that. That's why I think that's the point. Facebook, in my view, need to make a decision about which direction it's going to and stick with that consistently. They're not going to be able to please everyone. There will be no pleasing of everyone. Now, as we know that there are long-term consequences to decisions taken by product managers and engineers and designers and data scientists sitting in their nice office in Facebook headquarters that could be impacting civil war in Myanmar. Now, as we know that, we have seen that, we should be much more careful about bringing these changes. So, breaking things fast is kind of like you build and break things fast. It's kind of like the culture, but we should probably slow down. We should probably think more deeply about the changes we are building into our products, because was it Winston Churchill that said that we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us? So we build our tools and then our tools we shape our tools and then our tools shape us.
But your concerns at the time about what really was going on, after...
I was mainly, I tried to talk to people who are in Silicon Valley because I was connected to a large group of people, but I feel like it was not being heard. It was not being heard. Even in 2015, it was not being heard. It was underestimated. I think.
Tell me then, what were you trying to express to people in Silicon Valley at the time?
It's very serious. Whatever that you are building has massive, serious, unintended consequences on the lives of people on this planet, and you are not investing enough in trying to make sure that what you are building does not go in the wrong way or go to the wrong people doing the wrong things. And I feel my general feeling was that I was not being taken seriously, which is okay. Most of these people are firefighting. They're dealing with problems. They are under the stress of their public companies reporting quarterly reports. They have to show growth, and investors are buying the stock in anticipation of like growth in the next few months, and I entertain this thought of like there's an expression that I got exposed to recently, which is casino capitalism. It's almost we're playing a game. Like everyone wants quick outcomes. Everyone wants to, because otherwise, like can you imagine companies saying like, okay, wait a moment, let's just stop our plans to grow and try and be a better force for the society. Sounds great, but that's not gonna sound great in the stock market. That's probably gonna be reflected on employees' morale, because once they see the stock sinking because the growth is not happening, they end up being demotivated. A lot of the big money that they could make is not going to be made anymore. So I empathize with the companies. It's not easy to prioritize this until it becomes a bottom line. Luckily, it is a bottom line right now, or it's becoming more of a bottom line. It's becoming more important for them to address these issues because they're now able to see the immeasurable consequences on their brand, right? So
although their stock price, for instance, is at a high right now.
Yeah, because they are still operating based on how they're operating. Like there isn't that much change, structural change that have happened yet, in my view. Most of it is reactive. Most of it has to do with trying to fix the problems that the media is talking about. And I think it's well-intentioned. I'm not judging the intentions here. I'm more questioning whether these changes are actually what are needed. It's pretty hard to go for the needed changes. They have serious consequences on the business.
But going back, I just want to, I'm so curious about those kind of conversations that you were having in early days, like 2011, 2012, because
I started actually the conversations I would have with more conviction in Silicon Valley, I would say probably 2013. Started 2013. During the period between 2011 and 2012, I was pretty busy with the day-to-day of Egyptian politics, and I was also less sure about anything, right? Like there was one time there was a page on in Egypt. All what it did, it had like hundreds of thousands of followers. All what it did was creating fake statements on behalf of politicians and public figures. And I was a victim of that page, where they wrote statements about me insulting the army, Egyptian army, which on one hand puts me in a serious risk, at a serious risk, because that is not something I said. So I don't want to own something I didn't say. And on the other hand, it plays to the propaganda machine that is working on smear campaigns against me. And I tried to reported that page, and Facebook response at the time was like, we can't verify whether this is a true statement or not. And we're not in the business of verifying that. And there was two sides of me. One, fully empathize, because I'm a technologist and I understand that it is extremely hard for them to actually verify. But the activist in me was very disappointed, because, well, you built a technology, you better know how to manage it, because otherwise people are going to be hurt. I could be beaten up in the street because of that page, and you are responsible for that. In a very direct way, you are responsible, because you operated the platform that created such fake news that posed a threat on my own personal safety. So I've been always in this position of like, I hear the two sides, and I know how complex it is. And I know it's not as easy as like writing that Facebook as a company is evil, it's capitalistic, it's just like trying to make money. People there are waking up in the morning just trying to make money by manipulating our brains. That's not what's happening. But at the same time, the people who are building these platforms are not fully understanding the impact and the human like whatever they're doing that impacts the lives of humans. For them, these are numbers, 10% growth, 15% engagement, and it's very expensive to measure the immeasurable.
Did it dawn on you at the time as well, and kind of obviously you liked Facebook at the time and saw it as a tremendous tool for good, but at the same time, Facebook essentially was becoming the public space, right, of the 21st century. It was becoming a public space, but a privatized one with its own incentive structures and its own economy of sorts. Was that something you were hip to at the time, or thinking about, or concerned about?
Yeah, I'm definitely concerned about it because I found myself in 2016 spending a lot of time and energy thinking about how to regulate social media. And there was part of me that say, well, from using a certain tool to try and regulate governments, you are now going to governments trying to regulate these tools. And that's an irony. But I thought it's maybe from the outside, it could seem like an irony, but what I'm looking for is rebalancing the powers. The power shift is so strongly now towards Facebook. They are not really accountable there are no checks and balances for the company. We only deal with after the fact, after the mass. We discovered many, many months later that Russian propagandists were using Facebook and creating Facebook pages, distributing content that is polarizing. We understood many, many, many months later that there were advertising campaigns with the same objective, or that Cambridge Analytica managed to get a lot of access to our private data through what seems to be illegal. Like legally, they had legal access to it, but they illegally stored the information and made use of it. So we're learning all these things in after the fact, but these things are so crucial and critical that we should not be learning about them after the fact. There need to be more checks and balances, and that's what I think. The effort need to be invested in. Like, I'm not in the business of questioning other people's intentions. I like to believe that most of these actions are not driven by evil intentions. They are driven by good intentions that are naive and uneducated, maybe arrogant, but they're not. As I said, no one is sitting down saying, "Oh, let me think about how to manipulate." As a product manager at Facebook, let me think about how to manipulate hack the brains of billions of users. No one is thinking that. They are thinking, how could we bring people how could we get them engaged in a positive experience that makes them love our brand and continue to use it for the next few years so we can sell them ads and make money. And that's why I think the energy and effort should not be directed towards outrage. So it's like we're fighting outrage with outrage. It should be directed towards, okay, Facebook, there are things that need to happen. In order for all of us to be part of this conversation, you have to share more data. You have to be much more transparent. You cannot be saying that we are all like equals at the table when you have all the data and none of the other stakeholders have access to that data. And that's why I think transparency, it's not the solution, but it's like a core element of approaching the problem. So that we also deal with the actual problem and not with a delusional problem that someone is incentivized to create so that they could benefit from it.
But what's so strange is that here you were, in 2011, and there was this uprising against a central power, right? A centralized power. But at the same time, you were using a tool that essentially was centralizing power over the public space. Is that in some ways, or at least online, is that something?
I did not think about it that way at the time, but now I do think about it in that way. I'm not opposed to centralization. I'm not opposed to decentralization. I do think that there are times where centralization is a better tactic for a system to thrive, and I think sometimes centralization is. And I think there are times where a hybrid model need to exist. So it's not about, what worries me is not about whether public space is centralized or not. What worries me is the absence of checks and balances, is the absence of accountability, is the absence of being humble to understand that you know very little and you have to really study what you're doing before you do it. So we have to also be careful for what we are asking for, and we have to not criticize Facebook for being naive and arrogant and building products that have sophisticated impact on people's lives without paying attention, while we suggest solutions that fall under the same category of being naive and arrogant and not really understand the consequences of what we're asking for. And that's where I think the trouble comes, right? Like, it is extremely hard. There's this scenario, like, in absence of data, it is extremely hard to be informed and to come up with solutions that work. And if Facebook is not providing the data, they're kind of create a scenario where they should be very accountable for everything that happens on their platform, because they are the ones who are in the only position to fix it. There's one thing that I want to talk about.
Okay.
About the algorithms, actually, that I did not.
Okay. All right. What is it?
So it's I call the algorithms mobocratic because they empower the mobs. They are not algorithms that optimizes for objectivity and truth, and like the values of what I would say healthy society. They're optimized for the anger, it's like the emotional outbursts, right? Like the most ridiculous opinions are the ones that will get propagated for. One of my friends was telling me, these congressmen and women do not really know the internet. Their questions were ridiculous. I looked at him and I was like, have you actually watched a few hours of the whole hearing of Mark Zuckerberg? And he said, no, I just watched the clips on Facebook. Basically, most of the clips on Facebook were the most ridiculous questions and answers. They were not the actual dialogue, because there were I think there were very deep questions and deep answers as well from Mark during the session. But it's just that because everybody in the business of creating viral content that's outrageous, we just got the dumbest questions, with the exception of one that was not that dumb, but dumbest questions propagated, and that could create a wrong perception in the heads of people. Oh yeah, these Congress people, they don't understand what they're talking about. But there are actually ones that really understood what they're talking about, and they put Mark in a position that got him. I could feel from the energy of how he was speaking that got him thinking. So again, like, I just think that the nature of the algorithms, which, as I was just saying, they're mobocratic. They enable the mobs, they reward the mobs, they incentivize the mobs, is the structural problem of social media. And it's so structural and so hard to change because it's linked with the notion that advertising revenue is in correlation with engagement. And if you try and basically optimize for what's true, what's not sensational, what's less polarizing, you are going to hurt engagement.
One of the things going back in time, again, is that this just the basic premise was to unite people, right? And then you're recognizing clues that this technology or this platform is not necessarily having that downstream consequence. Am I?
What I realized is that it does not only unite people; it could tear them apart too. And I think if I'm contributing to this system, I'd put a goal of like, how could we see more of the unity and less of the polarization? And it's non-binary. It's never going to be binary. You're not going to achieve a state where, this is a platform where everybody is united. You want to be a platform for all ideas. You want to be a platform for empowering people to have their voice and get it out. But you also want to try and build for whatever that gets the best version of people. So you have to have a sense of direction of what, I do think Facebook is a publication, whether Facebook likes it or not. It makes billions of distribution decisions every day. It's algorithms designed by the engineers are the proxy editors. They just make engineers and product managers, designers, data scientists. They're all proxy editors. They make algorithms that optimize for certain type of content. So they are making editorial decisions. And the question here is like, are these editorial decisions the best editorial decisions? And the question of the best here, best for what? Probably they are the best for Facebook. We all know that on the short term, because they does increase engagement. They does help grow the company's advertising revenues. The argument here that is hard to prove that this could actually hurt the long term, because Facebook does not want to eventually become a tabloid newspaper. I would imagine its size is much bigger than just being a tabloid newspaper. It has much more potential than that. Therefore, I think it's more of a question of like, what do we do within this complicated system in order to make the algorithms less mobocratic, more meritocratic? We operate in knowledge-based societies. We have this. The more knowledge you have, the more likely you should get a voice, and the more you should demonstrate that knowledge in a non-partisan way. I'm not saying one group versus the other. And the question is like, how to build the algorithms to reward that. You just don't. Enabling popular content is not necessarily good content. It could be toxic content. It could get people to do bad things. And until we fully realize that and penalize bad content, first of all, identify bad content and what is bad content in a way that's nonpartisan, in a way that could have enough consensus. And then you start penalizing it so that you see less of, and then also define good content and see how would you be able to reward it. And I don't think we're there yet. I also don't think that we're paying enough attention to the algorithms. We're talking more about fake news. Because these are easier topics to understand. They're more viral. They create a much more simple narrative. Oh yeah, Facebook is promoting fake news. Hey, Facebook, why don't you stop all the fake news on your platform? But, what is fake? Okay, is person X did event Y fake? How do you know if it's fake? Because, there are cases that are clearly fake news and you could spot them. But there are much less nuanced cases where even the best editor in a newspaper would not be able to say if it's fake or not. So how do you deal with that? And I think the way I would approach this problem is to actually go back to the fundamentals. You're building an economic system with incentive structure. Just go review these, because there is a bug there. And the bug is leading to a lot of unintended consequences that none of you want to see happening. None of the stakeholders within the system want to see happening. Therefore, it's probably better to tackle that and fix it.
Those conversations that you were having between like 2011 and 2013, or as you're...
No, after 2013.
2013. Okay, yeah. But were you saying to engineers and others in Silicon Valley there are serious unintended consequences to what you've designed here?
Yeah, that's basic. My English was not that articulate as yours, but yeah, I was saying that.
You were saying that. And the response was what? Or was there concern? The response was what?
The response was, yeah, we hear you. Like, yeah, maybe. But then what do we do? Isn't engagement. Like, there were like kind of, it's almost like I was thinking about creating a version of what I call frequently asked questions and answer them all. Because there are things like, isn't that what the user want? Like, one of the arguments I've always had is like, why are you in a position to to kind of like, do you want to create like an editor, like what Wael think has as like the core of how the algorithm should operate? And I'm like, absolutely not. But I think that the engagement-driven algorithms are not the answer either. So they realize they understand that there might be unintended consequences. They're much more skeptical than me about them because no one wants to think that they're waking up every morning creating bad unintended consequences in the world. Even if you are working in a smoking company, like you're probably not. You'll have to have less belief in smoking kills. You will have to convince yourself that this is all too much. And my uncle have smoked until they die 90 and they were completely fine. No one wants to admit that what they're doing is bad. So I got a lot of that, and I also got some empathy, but then people have day-to-day problems to solve, and that was not their bottom line, and they're not going to go out of their way creating dropping engagements and not be celebrated within their teams, and go through their 6 months performance appraisal and be proud of like dropping engagement on the platform for 20%. No one is going to do that. Everyone wants to see what the leadership of the company wants to see the company, and they find their role within so that they could thrive within the organization. So that's why I understand the complexity of it and how hard it is. And I'm always empathetic of how hard this problem is, especially because it's a new problem, especially because we have not built enough nuance yet. We don't understand this yet. We created a monster. A monster is an outrageous term. We just created something that's way bigger than any of us. Like, I don't think Mark himself have ever imagined that Facebook is going to go this far. And I don't think that he wants to see it harming anyone. He actually wants to see it as a platform for good.
Right, but at the time you were saying that it's not simply a platform for good, that if you're optimizing for engagement and that's what your algorithms do, then there are harmful consequences, and it can create divisions as much as it can create unity.
Yeah, and most of the responses like, yeah, there is bad, but the good outweighs the bad, and you get sunk into the PR narratives of these companies, and it's just again, like you go into a version of casino capitalism. Like, everyone is celebrating and want to feel good about themselves, and we're not responsible for these problems. And I mean, even technically, you can also like directly link the problems to the platforms. There is a bit of exaggeration that takes place. Even I'm aware of my own exaggeration towards how the platforms are responsible for these problems. And unfortunately, like, the narrative that everyone looks for is simple. How to point fingers, who to point fingers to, and what's the simple message you have. And life is far more complex than this.
So can a company of this size and reach and power and scale actually solve these problems? Or is the problem itself at scale?
So I think that companies are like humans. We are never going to be perfect, but there are people who strive to be perfect or strive to be good. And in this journey, they make a lot of mistakes and they learn and they improve. And there are ones that just don't care. There are ones that continue to be who they are, and they're happy with whatever they are doing, regardless of the consequences. So my general philosophy here is that, yes, companies could always improve, and their scale is not. It should not be used as an excuse. It's actually power. Like Facebook as a company, or YouTube, or any of these social media companies make billions of US dollars in revenues and profits, and they could use some of these resources back into creating more responsible technologies. And one of the things that I keep thinking about a lot recently is, like, why aren't there enough social scientists within these platforms that are included not in the aftermath, not in like, let's analyze the data coming out of the products we're building, but more of like, let's actually be part of the product development cycle. Let's actually have conversations with these social scientists who are empowered to help us understand what could be the potential blind spots that we are having when we're dealing with these products that changes and alters the behavior of humans. And why aren't we having enough of those? Why aren't we having enough of people who understand different languages? Since we are operating in a certain country with a certain language, why aren't we pouring enough resources, hiring enough resources to help? And I understand the arguments, by the way, for things like these. Like, for example, the social scientist one that slows down the product development cycle. And you want to build, because the culture here that needs to be changed, by the way, is to build fast and break things. And I don't think you should, at the size of Facebook, you should not build fast, and you should be very careful as you break things, because when you break things, you could be causing a lot of damage and unintended consequences. It's also a matter of the bottom line. It's like, for example, like people who does operations as cost centers. Until we stop thinking of them as cost centers, then it's going to be very hard to justify hiring a lot of resources within that. Facebook actually did talk about they are working on increasing their operational teams that take care of like all these abuse issues and the safety teams, community teams, and that's a great step. So I don't think the problem here is that we can't solve these problems, because I do think that it's non-binary, as I said. You just strive to be creating less problems as much as you can. I think the real problem here is more of focus. If you are only focused and consumed by the short-term nature of these businesses and corporations, and not the long-term implications on the society, then you are a great member of the casino capitalism game, and you are definitely contributing to making the world a worse place. And if you want to be a member of the people who want to make the world a better place, you have to think more about the long-term consequences. And it's extremely hard. It's easier for me to say that here as I'm like sitting down, and I don't own the accountability to whatever solutions that I would propose. But it's the inevitable for them running such a massive audience platform. It is inevitable for them to invest much more heavily on this. Like, I would imagine this is a bottom line for the society. It might not be a bottom line for the company right now, or as much of a PR crisis. It's more of a PR crisis than a bottom line for the company. It's starting to be one, but it is definitely a bottom line for the society, because election results could be altered using these tools. Politics could be hacked using these tools, and social norms, social rest could be also disrupted. So these are really serious problems that need real serious dedication towards solving them if we care about the society.
Great.
There was one thing, when you were telling the story about starting the initial page, you said that it was June 10th, 2011, and you misspoke.
Yeah.
So can you just say again, it was June 10th, 2010?
In 10th of June 2010, I was working at Google at the time in Dubai, and I was in my study room, and as I was browsing my Facebook feed, I saw a photo of a tortured person, looks young, and I just couldn't believe what I saw, because it was a corpse. It was a dead person, and it says the police beaten him up to death. And I normally try and question everything I see on social media, and I try and verify. So I was like, this is too bad to be true. It's so crazy. The photo was crazy, and I started looking online and trying to figure out if this is actually a true story. This guy's really Egyptian, and I started learning his name is Khaled Saeed. He's an Alexandrian, and he was chased by two police officers who ended up beating him up to death. And I remember crying in my study room because I felt that, you know, there's no price for the police force to pay for such actions, and as long as they don't pay for it, they're gonna continue doing it. In any dictatorship, those who exercise the force on people are barely accountable for any bad actions. I felt very helpless, and I also felt that I could be this person. I could be Khaled. I could be walking in the street, and I could, you know, or I get politically engaged and I get arrested and beaten up and tortured or killed, and nothing happens. And at that time, I wanted to do something about it. I did not want to just like sit down, watch from afar in grief, and move on, because that has been happening for years. And I decided to create an anonymous page on Facebook. I did not really see that as something big, or I just wanted to express myself. I felt that I have something that is important to say. It was mainly for me. I did not want to look back and say that happened and I just didn't do anything about it. And in just 3 days, this page, and I named the page Wael Khaled Saeed because I wanted to tell everybody, you could be Khaled next day. Probably today, you could be Khaled. You just don't know. And I created the page, and I, for the first few posts, I was actually writing in the name of Khaled. Like I was, as if Khaled is alive or speaking from his grave. With that all in mind, I wanted to try and create an environment where we could get closer together and increase our voice and ask the regime to take us more seriously.
I do have to ask you this, because I you know, was the movement, did the movement fail?
Well, I think the way I see it now is like it was too naive to celebrate on 11th of February 2011, because 60 years dictatorship cannot be, or even longer. I mean, the first time we have had elections in Egypt that were fair and democratic was in 2012, when Mohamed Morsi won by 51%. He barely lost the election to his opponent. And it's also equally naive to think that it failed as of today because of what happened was a massive disruption of the balance of powers. And it's true, like we're in a downturn now. Actually, things are far more worse than it used to be in 2010. But I'm not one of those people that think like everything failed. I think that's a good consumable media narrative, just like how the good consumable media narrative that evolved in 2011. These things will take time. It's not over yet. It will come in different shapes and forms. And when I say it's not over yet, it's not like I want chaos or no. What I'm saying is like this disruption. The consequences of this disruption are not fully realized yet. I don't know what's going to happen in Egypt in 2 years from now. And that is a change, because 20 years ago, you would know what's going to happen in 2 years. It's just going to be the same. Everything is, it's status quo. The regime has enforced everyone to abide by their norms, and it was more of an oligarchy where very few number of people are sucking most of the resources and silencing everyone else.